An official welcome and good day, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is David Cory with the Emotional Intelligence Training Company, and I'm here with my partner.
Hi, I'm Jill Cory, and I'm also with the ITC, a certified coach and trainer, and happy that you could join us on this Valentine week.
We thought because of Valentine's week that we would talk about relationships and relate the EQI model with the relationships, and we think it makes for a really great presentation. We didn't know how great until we really got into it, and I think it turned out pretty well. So we're excited to share this with you. But we're going to start off with a poll. So here we've got 13% said sometimes I feel like I don't deserve to be with my fill in the blank. 53% said I love sharing my feelings with my partner. I had, interestingly, I had all negative statements. And Jill said, "Why are they all negative?" And she said, well, "How about I love sharing my feelings with my partner?" Uh, I hesitate to ask for what I need from my blank. I feel like I do more of the relationship work. So we've got so people have checked off something for everything, and that's kind of what we were expecting and hoping, and it's like relationships are hard, and they're not easy, and sometimes we do these things, and sometimes we feel this way. Jill, did you want to
So,
comment on the outcome?
well, just that it's interesting because relationships actually, in the research, show that relationships reduce people's stress. And yet, 67% of us said that sometimes your relationship stresses your partner or your friend stresses you out. So that's an interesting um, observation. But it may be the kind of stress, Dave, that is in the healthy stress. Well, let's
It,
just assume that because
it could
otherwise
be.
we're
It could be.
anomalous as a group.
All right, let's get going. We also realized that we probably had more content than we had time to share it with you, so we're gonna try to move along. But we've got this. I reference this study frequently. I've never really read the study. I just know a couple of findings from it. But it is called the Adult Development Study from Harvard University, looking at graduates from 1938, and they followed these graduates throughout their lives. And this fellow, Robert Waldinger, is the Harvard professor who's responsible for the project now. He does a TED talk. And one of the things he says is loneliness kills. And they've got empirical evidence, they've run the statistics. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. Isn't that fascinating? And this is the study where they found that the single biggest factor in longevity is relationships. So we did our poll already. We're going to talk about relationships and how each of the 15 competencies of the EQI 2.0, many of you are familiar with the EQI 2.0, but just in case you're not, we'll tell you a little bit about that first, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, you know what? Historically, there have been gender differences in men and women in terms of the health benefits and other benefits of relationships. And we may talk about that a little bit as we go through. So we're going to talk as if gender isn't as significant a barrier or a factor as it might be. And I think the next couple of webinars, we're going to look a little bit more deeply into the relationship with gender. So just if people are wondering where the gender analysis is, we'll kind of layer that in over the next couple of webinars.
So this is, as you many of you know, this is the EQI model, and it is a model of skills and competencies, all of which are emotional, which are not necessarily emotions themselves, but they are competencies which answer the question, what do you do if you want to be emotionally intelligent? Well, here's what you do. These are the 15 emotional skills that help us to be emotionally intelligent. This model was originally created in the 80s. It has been published by a Canadian publishing company, Multi Health Systems. They are the creators of the fellow who originally created it as the basis for an emotional intelligence assessment called the Emotional Quotient Inventory. It's been updated in 2011 to give us this beautiful, colorful wheel model. And we use it frequently in our coaching and our leadership development work with organizations. It frequently talks about the analogy between this model and a mixing board that you find in a recording studio. And it's a wonderful analogy, which just talks about the fact that that we kind of do all these things naturally, and then we kind of have a natural level. And once we understand it and develop our skill level, then we can adjust the dials. We can dial certain EQ competencies up and certain ones down as needed to be more effective in situations. But it requires awareness and practice and coaching and etc. to develop our skills and develop our range.
And so today we're going to be looking at the EQ competencies, which is in the box just beyond the center circle, and see, we're going to treat them as if they're independent variables. So we're going to look at each one of them and just explore a little bit about how they relate to relationships, how we use them in relationships. But part of the complexity of the model and the contribution of the model is that we know that these 15 competencies are always interacting, and that we need to be thinking of them in terms of balancing and kind of leveraging what's most relevant for the relationship or the business process or context. But for today, we're going to look at them as if they're independent variables.
Let's start with self-regard. It was really interesting thinking about each one of these in terms of relationships. And I love this image. You've probably seen these images before of the kids and dressed as superheroes. And kids should be our role models with respect to self-regard, right? They just um, they're unaffected by the messaging of from the world about who they should be and how they should be, and you can just see the self-regard beaming.
Yeah, I think the goal with self regard is one of the interesting ones when we think about the music soundboard and the sliders that we want to move up and down. In some ways, that's not as true for self regard. What we want is a stable sense of self regard so that we're not necessarily overly adjusting our perception of ourself and our worth depending on the relationship that we're in. When occasionally people will describe themselves as people pleasers, or on the other side, very arrogant or impervious to feedback. And in both of those fixed places, um, or not fixed, but in both of those positions, there's less stability in your self regard because you're not relying on yourself and your self assessment to understand who you are and how you show up and the conscious choices you are about that. So, in this one, when you're with a partner who's supportive and caring, you may get reflected back to you pretty positive ideas about yourself, but that they need to really come within you to be believable and for you to be centered in them. So what we're sort of making the point here is that relationships are should not totally influence who you are, and if they do, then you probably need to do some work on self. Because too high, you have this risk. The risk is in interest in self rather than relationship. Too low means that you're focused on your partner rather than yourself, which is not a contribution to either you or the relationship. And then this sort of notion that your worth is dependent on your partner makes you very vulnerable in relationship. So the benefits of self-regard are that you get to be yourself. It's much easier and more fun to be authentic than to be pretending or managing who you are and how you show up and what information you choose to share. And so we know that healthy relationships are made up of real people, not of sort of more surface level people. Leona asks, if someone is low in self-worth, how can you help them? So first of all, one of the things that we do always want to think about is, where are people getting their ideas of who they are? There's so much propaganda about especially who women should be, but increasingly the stereotypes of masculinity and femininity are reinforcing false ideas of who we ought to become. And so that's the first thing, is to kind of deconstruct where we're getting our messages. What are the distortions that are being reflected back? And helping people to think more the truth about themselves as they know it. So we're not looking for inflated self-regard. We're looking for stable, accurate assessments of ourselves. So I think that's the work, is to get people to tell themselves the truth and then reframe or dismantle those lies or deceptions that kind of, self-help books, the beauty industry, social media perpetuate about who we need to be and that we're never enough.
Self-actualization. This is about, as you know, it's about shared values, goals, purpose, dreams. It's about moving in the same direction in relationship. Not conditional on sharing all aspects of meaning and purpose, because of course you want to have your own thing when you're in a relationship as well. Connected relationships are mutual with room for both people's needs and dreams. The risks here that we occasionally see is giving up your dreams for your partner. So your partner has a dream, and you both maybe can't have yours, or it's difficult to or challenging. So one person gives up their dream for their partner. We've seen this mostly with perhaps women following men in their careers. This was certainly a thing from the previous generation, and may carry over a bit into this one. And we see that another risk is the feeling like there's an imbalance in the relationship. Person gets to be fulfilled, one person gets to make sure the other person's fulfilled, and it's unequal, it's unbalanced. And the benefits here are, when you've found your soulmate, there's an alignment there. There's a real connection. Relationships are made of real people with real dreams and visions for their lives that can intertwine and support each other. And of course, what we really would like is to have that sense of shared meaning, purpose, and fulfillment with each other. Let's talk about emotional self-awareness. This is an interesting one. Jill, do you want to speak to this?
Sure. So obviously, emotional self-awareness means paying attention to what's happening for you. And so this is the definition: to attend to self and the emotions. And in emotional self-awareness, we each get to enjoy a range of emotions that are connected to ourselves. Um, but we don't want them overly affected by our partners. So again, similar to self-regard, are we being influenced or constrained, or do we have freedom of both self-awareness and expression in the relationship? So this willing to share information, you can see how self-awareness, I think this actually should go into expression, but those two competencies really bleed into each other. But it's about knowing who you are and then being willing to share who you are. So studies show that sharing information really helps relationships. And honestly, this should be an emotional expression, not in awareness. But it does require um, the combination of emotional self-awareness and expression are most effective when they're at the same level, so that what you're feeling is also what you're expressing. When they're out of balance, the risk is that you're responding more from a default. The risks in emotional self-awareness that we're not paying attention to what's going on beneath our surface. And it's for us, but also for our partners, and we only know that through expression. And so then, if we're controlling what we're feeling because our partners don't want to see us overly happy or angry, then we're not able to have a full range, like in the spectrum of emotions, if our partners aren't comfortable with that. Benefits of self-awareness is that we can identify all the things that are going on for us, have more acceptance of ourselves, and then be able to show up more authentically in the relationship.
Well, emotional expression is, and ideally you will be free. You'll have this freedom to express your emotions, ideas, dreams, hopes without judgment or fear. In your relationships, you let your partner know who you are. And again, you'll see this throughout the relationship literature. Communication is key. The risk of emotional expression being high without it being regulated in any way is that you may overwhelm your partner. It's just too much. Too low, struggling to express your emotions, leaves your partner guessing and making assumptions. It doesn't allow your partner to really get to know you and what you stand for, and it negatively affects trust. We don't trust what we don't know, and so if people aren't forthcoming with information, aren't expressing what's beneath their surface, then it's really hard to trust them. It's really hard to get to know them and hence trust them. Benefits here are that emotional honesty um, expressing warmth and affection and a whole range of honest emotions. We don't often think that when we don't say something that it's kind of dishonest. We kind of just think it's a choice that we're choosing not to share something with a partner. However, there is a dishonesty there, and honest relationships are of course just strengthen that connection. It's respectful, builds trust. There's an authenticity there, and of course, all the in the relationship literature, they say talk with each other, and once again, honest communication is essential to healthy relationships.
It's really hard to think about each of these in isolation, isn't it? Because you think of emotional expression, and then what are the impacts of not expressing and expressing? So um, we just don't really have the time today to think about it. But I'm thinking about reality testing. It's very hard if you have a partner who doesn't share information. It's very hard to do reality testing. Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, it's just thinking in line with the emotional awareness, like not having the awareness of your partner for the time and place to have that expression. I know I've walked into some bad communication with my partner because she wasn't in a spot where she could have that communication.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I was willing to express and share, not seeing my partner as where they were really led to some negative outcomes.
Right, right. Because of that imbalance, right? And that's kind of the expectation, is that we move deeper into relationships together, or at least in open communication where each other is. And I think that there's a lot of risks in emotional expression, emotional self-awareness and expression, if one person is contributing more to the relationship than the other. And certainly the gender literature would suggest that women contribute more in this arena than men do in most relationships, and that's obviously not true across the board, but that is a tendency from a gender perspective.
But I like the idea of timing, Andy, because some people may be too emotionally expressive too soon in a relationship, and then the other person perceives that as that's too much, and it's moving too quickly, and will maybe back away. So that timing about how much to share and when, that's going to be guided by some of our other EQ competencies like empathy
And reality testing.
and impulse control is going to help you regulate.
And previous experiences too, probably, right?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And which is
yes.
part of our reality testing, because we bring those previous experiences into our current relationship. And if you think of reality testing as sort of a set of beliefs and biases that we carry with us, and we need to stay open to testing this new reality rather than making assumptions from previous ones, which is not easy. Assertiveness is the ability to say what's okay and not okay in relationships. And the more that both people are able to say that, again, the more honestly you're negotiating your lived experience with each other. So then there's this ability to ask for what you need. And although there's a gender component to this, we do teach girls to ask for less than we teach boys to ask for. And part of that is related to self-regard, where we teach boys that they're more deserving than girls. And part of it is that I think there's a lot of things related to power and dynamics in relationships. And again, we're going to look at that a little bit later. But when people are both able to ask for what they need, your cards are on the table, and it's so much easier to feel like you're negotiating reality rather than hoping for something to happen. And that hoping for something to happen often can lead to either conflict or resentment, that sort of internal conflict or external conflict. Question, is this a good time to talk? To be very helpful. Yeah, it's a very good one here. It's also a very good one in impulse control, because you, again, give that space for some pause and consent, right? And if we raise the idea of consent into each of these competencies as central, then everything is about, is this a good time for, right? Because there's some, I would suggest that in relationships, some implied consent, and that may not always be true, right? We assume it's a good time to talk. I assume that Dave will just take out his earbuds and put his computer away if I stand at the office door. And
It's very annoying.
but he's not assertive enough to say, "This is annoying, Jill. Can you come back? This is not a good time." So yeah, so consent here is really important in general, but assertiveness is also about just what is okay and not okay. And when we say that, we also are pointing to this idea that we do want to use positives. So what is okay is that you come into the office and you want to talk about work or mom or relationships or dogs, but it's not okay right now because I'm busy. So we do both what is okay and not okay for us. And then, of course, we know the range from assertive versus aggressive versus passive. And on both ends of the scale, being too passive and not saying what you need, not saying what's going on for you, can leave the other person lost and confused and trying to make their way without any guardrails. And aggressive can be very hurtful and silencing. So neither of those are particularly helpful in relationships.
I mean, you're saying so much that it just got me percolating all over the place here. I mean, having worked with emotional intelligence for a while, there's no question those of us that are doing it understand how these all are intertwined with one another, and that it really kind of, depending on who the person is, it really will depend on what you're bringing in and how things impact. But something that's becoming much more apparent to me is that the reality testing emotional intelligence skill, I mean, it just seems, and we're seeing this in North America, I mean, the polarization of how different people's realities are now. I mean, so this skill, this emotional intelligence skill, like when you said negotiating reality, right? You know, to a great extent, that's what it's about these days, because there doesn't seem, getting to the truth, you know, especially in relationships between people, and I've done a fair amount of relationship coaching and in the past, it seems that that's what it's about. It's like, you know, it's not this or that we're going to have to negotiate what the reality is, even though that might not be your truth, right? So my question is, you know, what's the impact on your self-regard, your emotional expression, your self-actualization, all that, if you're, you know, I mean, I guess you could say compromising, but you could also say accommodating if you want to put a positive spin on that, right? But what would be the impact of that versus actually getting to the actual truth?
Right. Well, we're so postmodern, I don't think we think there is an actual truth anymore. So and
oh, that's great.
I stepped into a Facebook conversation. It was a picture of a woman of the 50s, and it was like the good old days. And you can imagine, any of you that know me, I've been a feminist for 65 years. And so I just said, you know, or this is a woman who is starving herself because of such rigid ideas about body and blah, 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 you know, oppression and not having access to work, fulfilling work. And the vile responses, like, were, as you can all imagine if you've been in those spaces, were shocking. And so to your point about reality, right? Like I don't think that we're ever going to share reality, but we need to with our partners. This is the point we're making, is that we need to feel like our partners, while there are differences, that there are some fundamental realities that we agree on. And it may be in the political realm, it may be on how you raise families, but those are spaces where I think that you can negotiate, but that's why you have to bring a whole self to a relationship. Otherwise, there's a dominance there that is, and that dominance will create an impact for the rest of that relationship's life. If one person is dominating the reality, you know, I work in the area of violence against women, so the model or the perspective of dominance is really critical in the work that we do, and it goes really beyond aggression to really dominating everything: conversations, finances, feelings. So that's what I'm always on the lookout for. Are people freely negotiating reality? And I think it's less important about what the reality is, and more important that there is freedom and consent.
Bill, I was just thinking when you were talking about that of a friend of mine who was recently talking about a first time foray into the world of online dating, which is rather limited in her community where she lives, you know, the candidate pool, let's just say.
Right.
So she had found a nice gentleman, and they'd gone on a few dates. And then he made an offhand comment about all the crazy vaccinated people, which is fascinating to me, because when in our history did you ever discuss vaccinations in like first dates?
Right.
Like I like it, just like, who knew? Like, I don't know. I would never have known someone's.
I showed Dave my polio shot right away. Like, I want to make sure that was okay with him.
Exactly. Like, since the days of the smallpox vaccines, it's like there's no way of determining these things. So anyway, I just and for her that was the absolute deal breaker. She's like, okay, we can't proceed. And I just think, you know, what you're saying about even just being clear on the reality, because I think this gentleman assumed that she felt the same way, or that it didn't matter to her or whatever. And for her, it was like, oh, that's the last time we're going to be going out together. So yeah, just clarity on that. And just further to, you know, your other comments on this new world we're negotiating, and what are some of these realities in this world when it comes to relationships.
Yeah. And much like what we talk about in EQ, that we go to defaults, in relationships, we often go to defaults, and the default is assuming that people are like us. And that's really what we're trying to raise here, is our own ability to speak to who we are and what's purposeful and meaningful for us, and maybe what's truth for us. And that's what the relationship is getting negotiated around. But if we don't come in with a higher self-regard, a sense of who we are, what our own personal meaning is, we won't be able to negotiate that relationship reality accurately. And so people, like, again, with men who are abusive, they present in a false way. They use what we call honeymoon behavior to show these positive-looking behaviors that are hiding. Sometimes we call it manipulative kindness at the beginning. And so those relationships don't get negotiated on real terms, on honest terms. But I'm always listening for where I think there's power dynamics versus relationship dynamics. So I'm always listening for that, whether it's in work or personal relationships, because if I'm working from a relationship paradigm and I'm coaching somebody who's in a power paradigm, it's not going to work. It's not. Or if I'm a leader trying to work with a staff person who's in a power paradigm, that's not going to work. Because our beliefs are so different.
That's great. Thank you. That fundamental realities that we believe together in a relationship is very powerful. In coaching, I will definitely, that's something that I'll pose as a question. Can we come to sort of fundamental realities between two people? I think that could be very powerful as a base starting point in creating that mutual reality between people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about this, but I feel like I just need to say this. In the research that I was part of a number of years ago now, and we use it all the time, and I've talked about it before, is that men who are abusive have a belief system that they are central, superior, and deserving, and that is in opposition to what relationships require. And for the most part, the rest of us are in a relationship paradigm that thinks about mutuality, respect, equality, connection, etc. So when I'm listening for the power dynamics, I'm listening to see where men, in my work case, but where people position themselves vis-a-vis these beliefs about relationships. Otherwise, a lot of harm can be done if you think you're working in a relationship paradigm and somebody's in that power paradigm. You know, I always use the example when you're with a medical professional and they've already got the blood pressure cuff around your arm, and they're saying to you, is it okay if I just take your blood pressure? But they're already doing it. That is not consent. So when your partner buys a motorcycle and says, is it okay if I buy a motorcycle? That is not consent.
Who would do that, buy a motorcycle without telling their partner? Can't imagine that.
And I think we take consent a little bit too much for granted in relationships. So that's what I'm talking about, is if you're really asking for approval or consent or agreement or contract, then it needs to be negotiated before you actually do the thing that you're doing, versus the notion of forgiveness,
which is a nice
less
segue into
palatable.
independence, because
Absolutely.
we do need our independence in relationships to an extent. And we need to be free to express ourselves, our opinions, our perspectives. We need to be who we are. We need to have dreams. We need to, try to meet our own needs. But the risk of being too independent is that you may want to spend more time apart than together than the other person does. Too low, and your partner may need their space. They might just say, okay, so every once in a while, Jill and I, because we fall into these patterns and habits, we look at each other and say, we have done every single thing together for how long now? It's good, but still, it's a bit weird. Like, why don't we just go do different things for a change? In any case, the risk is emotional dependency, and once we become dependent on someone else emotionally, we kind of lose our own direction and a bit of our compass there. Jill has added some pieces based on her experience and the work that she does, and so I'll just let her explain that piece.
Well, I won't say very much again, but I think the idea here is it can be a person just feels dependent on their partner, but it also might be that in an abusive relationship, there's a forced dependency. And so I always have both frames of reference when I'm thinking about each of these competencies. Like, are people just feeling vulnerable and don't know how to meet their own needs, or is there a dynamic there that's creating a more forced dependence? So
the benefits here are it keeps your relationship balanced. Other people help make our life satisfying, but they can't meet every need. There are some needs that we just have to meet on our own. There are just some interests that we don't share. Jill's a sports nut. I don't like sports, so she goes and watches her sports, and I go play music. So we have those kind of divergent interests, and we just need to leave some room for outside activities, different perspectives, opinions, etc.
And the research
Sarita?
shows that the more fulfilling relationships we have, the healthier our long-term health is impacted by that. So it isn't just about one person, for sure. Sorry, go ahead, Sarita.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yes, really quick. All this information is great. And I have been working through all these different areas myself for so many years, and it takes so much work and time, right? And that's self-awareness. So reading and understanding what you're explaining is that moment, okay, of self-awareness, reminders, this is how it works. What I'm wondering is, to be able to continue that improvement, I don't know if there is research that shows awareness itself can help improve this much, but what does it take to really be able to balance all these different areas of emotional intelligence and be, at the end of the day, competent through them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are all works in progress, Sarita, and we're all going to get help in different ways. We're going to get support and learning from coaching, from books, from resources, from courses, and we're all on our journey together. So,
well, I would just add to that to be cautious that you aren't dialing up that self-development or self-actualization side so much that the other elements in the EQI model are not getting attended to. Because there is a tendency to believe that the more we pursue self-improvement, the better life improves, but it actually can have an inverse relationship, right, to personal freedom and development.
you have to actually use the information that you get in those training courses at some point.
Exactly. And that's exactly where I am, because I feel like sometimes I can really work hard, but I have to be aware how this is impacting the rest of my life, right? And my relationships and the quality.
Yeah. At some point you just want to go out and use it, be in relationships, do some things.
Thank you.
Interpersonal relationships is a fascinating EQ competency because it's what we're talking about, and and it is its own competency. So what makes it a competency? Well, are those relationships mutual? Are they mutually satisfying, or are they out of balance? Is there room for differences? For again, this negotiation of needs. Much of what we've been talking about, no one can be everything. We might want them to be. So again, it's like sometimes we need to pursue our own interests. We need to accept people as they are, not try to change them. If you've ever tried to change someone, you know that it just doesn't happen. People have to change themselves, and the risks here are that we get into a win-lose power paradigm that's about one person benefiting from the suppression or oppression of another, and those relationships are just not good, at least for one person. And we need to try to change those or get out of those relationships. And then the benefit here is that we can affirm each other, we can support each other, we can be in each other's corners, have each other's backs. And again, going back to that longevity study, we know that it's healthy. It helps us to live longer. Brene Brown said it's the reason we're here. Connection is the reason we're here. And so, we can't say enough about this. And really, the whole webinar is about this. So let's move on and talk about some of those component parts.
The research is pretty clear that kind of consensual, connected relationships have many benefits, including fulfilling lives, reduction of stress, greater sense of purpose, better healing. There's some interesting research that we heal quicker. Some of the research is showing that on the vaccine side of things, that people who are in strong relationships are more likely to have immunity.
So empathy, we've talked about assertiveness, we talked about independence, that's about you. Now it's about the other person. How are your skills with the other person? Can you consider and put the needs of your partner ahead of your own? Can you understand the impact that you have on them, that your emotional expression, impulse control, flexibility, etc., all these things have on your partner and the relationship? Can you demonstrate that your care and concern for that person? We want to avoid rescuing or controlling the situation. We think we want to take the pain away of the people that we love, but we can't do it. It's not possible. So what is the limitation on empathy? It's being there, it's showing up for, it's maintaining connection, but it's not fixing and it's not solving. The risk here of too high an empathy, you could be setting aside your own interests and pursuits in favor of your partner. If you do that too much, it could lead to resentment ultimately. Too low, you risk unintentionally hurting your partner, overlooking their feelings, making them feel uncared for. Benefits here, you communicate that you care. This is how we communicate that we care, by paying attention to the emotions of others. This is our demonstration of love, and that willingness to be vulnerable builds trust with others.
This is one that shows up sometimes in my coaching for women leaders, that if their empathy is too high, that they're not actually using enough assertiveness to make sure things are getting done as well as relationships are maintained. So there is a caution there in too high empathy in a work environment as well. And we're not promoting not being empathetic, but just that it needs to be in balance with some other competencies.
Jill, can I just ask you if you have any particular resources you'd recommend around developing empathy? I was just recently coaching some of our operations guys, and this is their hardest area to even wrap their mind around it. Yeah. So I've been asking them if they've heard of Brené Brown and actually sending them little clips, but I feel like that's perhaps it's quite a stretch, right?
Yeah.
For these guys. I wondered if there was a baby step between no empathy and Brené Brown.
I think the baby step is just asking leaders to be more aware of the impact they're having, right? So it pushes the view from self to other.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Social responsibility. So this is more broadly thinking about who we are in relationship, not to just our partner, but in the broader context, but also who are you as a partnership in relationship to this idea of being responsible in relationships. So are you mutually contributing? How do you make your plans together? So there's something about assertiveness and independence rolled into this, but there's also this sense of what's my responsibility in this kind of social environment called family or called, work team. Do you do your part in the relationship? Are you willing to be accountable for your choices and your mistakes? And do you continue to put trustworthiness as a goal that you want to show up and be known for? Which is, in the broader sense, this idea of social responsibility is about contribution and thinking beyond your own needs. So the risk is if it's too high, that a partner can feel smothered, as if you don't trust them to take care of themselves. So it's like, being overly involved and taking care of everything. And too low, the partner feels like they're not contributing, that there's no space for them, and that they're not equal in the relationship.
Can I just tell my quick story, Jill?
Sure.
I used to think, when Jill said, "Where do you want to go to eat?" That my saying "wherever you want" is fine with me. That I was being easygoing, I was being flexible, I was being laid back. One day, I can't remember what I was talking about, but it was during a course I was teaching. All of a sudden, I realized I was actually not being a contributing member of that relationship. I was abdicating my responsibility to actually offer my opinion and my input into a shared decision and leaving it all on Jill. And then if it didn't work out, I could blame her for it, for the evening not going well, for it being, a bad decision or whatever. But now when Jill says, "Where do you want to go to eat?" I actually think about it. It's like, okay, so where do I want to go? And I actually try to do my share of the work. Jill ends up doing most of the share of the work in our relationship anyway, because she's really good at it. But I really try to get involved and be a contributing member, offer my opinion and my input. But it's not easy. It takes effort.
And just to be clear, I never ask, where do we want to eat out? Because I always cook and I love it. So I never ask that question.
That was a long time ago,
that was
Jill.
A long time
we used to go out for dinner.
Absolutely. Remember, Dave? Okay. So the benefits of feeling mutually responsible is that you really are exchanging your gifts of time, expertise, knowledge, perspective, and affection for each other. So you really are creating not just caring, but a responsibility to the relationship as well.
Renee.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if it's here, but whatever you said here sparked it. And what I've learned to do with my husband is finally speak up. So maybe this is assertive and say, I'm curious, when you say that, or is this what you're trying to tell me? Because when you're saying that, I'm interpreting that this is really what you're telling me. And so this is how that makes me feel. But I have a feeling maybe you mean something completely different. And then we clear up something that's been bothering me for 5 years. If I'll just ask, I'm hearing this, is that what you meant? I've even done it at work. I'm like, you said this and walked away. I'm just going to ask you, did you mean, are you saying that you think I this, or, because that's how oh no, I didn't mean it like that at all. Mm-hmm. Completely avoided a conflict that would have lasted like a while. So you have to have the courage to do that. And I don't always, but sometimes I'm just like, by golly, I'm going to ask, because I'm really tired of feeling upset about that.
Yeah, so that's assertiveness. It's emotional self-awareness, first of all, then some assertiveness and reality testing, like checking out what you think might be happening and getting their reality fed back. So you're using a bunch of them. And then this responsibility from the other side, that person also needs to feel responsible for being clear and open in the relationship, so that you're building that together. And that's what can be out of balance, is one person doing more of that both emotional work and practical work in relationship. Work or family. Problem solving. You're different people, and your habits and processes may not always be in alignment. And we know that if you think about leaders, some leaders are more likely to approach and some are more likely to avoid. And that's just true for all of us, that we have a default place about the meaning and emotions around solving problems. So I jump into problems. I get excited about problems. I love problems. I can't stop talking when there's a problem and thinking. And I have a partner who avoids problems. And so that's like it.
Sometimes they get better on their own.
Yeah, sometimes they just fix themselves. So this is a place where we, again, need to uncover people's processes, right? There's no right or wrong, although I kind of think there is. There's no right or wrong, but we do need, Renee, as you're saying, to be curious about what's your approach, what's emotionally happening for you right now, what's getting in the way of us making this decision, right? Because if we skip over the emotional aspect of what's happening when there's a problem involved, whether it's in a partnership at work or in your relationship, you skip over what's fundamental to problem solving, and that is the emotions behind it. So sometimes we're trained to just fix the problem and step over the emotions. So if problem solving is too high, you might overlook the emotions and just go to fixing the problem, and therefore kind of silencing that the partner's concerns or emotions around it. If it's too low, it can cause frustration from your partner because it seems like you're disengaged, and that worry or procrastination kind of takes you out and you become absent, right? So what's the benefit of really understanding your own emotions and the emotions of your partner in this process of solving problems is that you respect that you might have different approaches to it, and that you help each other to work through. Dave and I sometimes get out our emotion cards, and it's like, what's really going on here? When you start to name the emotion, you name what is the obstacle or the incentive to the problem, right? Like I get excited and passionate and kind of fired up around problems, and Dave gets worried, and there's too many choices, and what if it's the wrong one? And so it's so enlightening and so helpful in this process.
I just posted the
things
slides.
Just fix themselves, Rebecca.
I just posted the slides in the chat box if you want to download them and take a look at them afterward. We're running out of time. It looks like we just may have a part 2 to this
we were thinking
beginning
we might,
series that we've started here. And
what's interesting about this is that on the 15 competencies, we actually have spent very little time in general understanding an interpersonal relationship as a competency, right, Dave? And so in the composite area, the other two are kind of more interesting than the relationship one. And as we began to unpack this, we realized that we have not given enough attention to this idea of what does it mean to use EQ specifically in relationships. So we're happy to have really had a deeper dive into it, and hope that it's helping you as well. We probably have time for one more, Dave.
Yep, let's do it. Here's reality testing. I told you we'd get there, and here we are. So reality testing really is based on this idea that our perception is our own reality. It's nobody else's. So how do we know that our perception is shared by others? We check it, we test it. So we have to check our perceptions, our biases, our beliefs with our partner. And do we, as partners, have a shared understanding of the relationship, of events that are going on, of the meaning of things? And again, that testing happens through dialogue. The risk of doing this, of over focusing on evidence, on what's tangible and observable, is that we get locked into a way of thinking that might not be creative and might not be innovative. Too low, and we focus on things that our partner doesn't value or share in common. We come home with an unusual purchase that the other partner doesn't agree with. If anybody's ever done that, not me, but anyone else. The benefit of being aligned here is when you got someone you can trust to talk things through, express your emotions, explore your perceptions. This can limit the risk of overindulging in private and potentially inaccurate thoughts and pursuits and activities. So again, it's just really being on the same page together. And it takes effort. It takes work. It's not like you can just do this once and it's done. You have to continually test and check everything. The question that we encourage people to ask themselves here is, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong about the way I'm thinking about this? What if I'm wrong about the way I'm feeling about things? And checking that out with someone, hopefully with your relationship, with your partner. Okay, and on that,
we got time for one more.
Okay, you go, Jill.
Ooh, impulse control. Oh, how many times have you wanted to say something and didn't? Not often. Or did and regretted it. So that in a nutshell is impulse control in relationships, where you either manage and pause, which is the pause button there, or blurt and, not always regret, but sometimes regret that you didn't give it just a sober second thought. So impulse control is a valuable tool for relationships, as it creates the space between emotions and expression of emotions to consider the impact. And so you can see how empathy gets layered in here. So if your assertiveness, say, is higher than your empathy, you may respond more with a kind of potentially regrettable response rather than empathy, where you're thinking about how's this going to land for the other person. If it's too high, you don't take the opportunity to say or do what needs to be said or done. In other words, you hold on too much, you're overly patient, maybe overly accommodating, etc. But too low, you might shoot from the hip and say or do things that you regret, that might damage the relationship, or at least the trust in the relationship. William, I see your hand, I'll get to you. So the sober second thought before talking. And I think we think in our relationships that we need less of that room because we've got so much agreement about who we are. But there's still room for some impulse control, which does not mean holding back. It just means making sure that it gets, a second thought. Conversation can be more productive and collaborative if you hit the pause button, gather your thoughts before you react. William.
So in the example that David gave about taking the earbuds out when you walk into his office, could part of that be an impulse control thing where he has learned to really highly utilize that instead of saying, look, I'm working, I'm busy? It's an impulse control reaction. Or also reality testing where it's like, it's better for me to just address her now than sit through supper where she's going to be giving me a hard time about the fact that I didn't give her attention again, like the history of reality or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So lots of things could be going on. Certainly what you're pointing to is my low impulse control, which is I have an idea and I go straight to talk to Dave about it. I don't look over and see if he's working or not. And high self-regard, it's like, I have an idea. Obviously he'll want to know about it right now.
Of course.
So lots of things can be at play.
I'm married, I understand that.
Yeah, so and that's the thing, sort of my initial comments, that we're treating them as if they're independent variables, but they're not. They're so connected to each other. So it would be very rare for one competency to be being used without a combination of high and low or right fitted. Yeah.
Can I just ask one question around this? If the couple, I mean, I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? If I was looking at you as a couple, and if it was my opinion that you hold the power in the relationship, if the two of you have decided that you can be more powerful or more important in the relationship, is that okay for that couple to be that way? Or as coaches, are those red flags for us? Because I'm seeing more and more with younger couples that there seems to be that kind of dynamic, and they seem to be really okay with that dynamic as opposed to there being this sort of equal balance. And again, I'm just using you guys as an example, not that I think that, right?
Because we're young? Is that why you're using us?
There you go.
Thanks,
That's
William.
called deflecting.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it is so interesting because one of the things that we learned in working with supporting women, and then I was in a men's treatment program for a number of years, we don't look at what's going on so much as what the impact is of what's going on. And so that's, to me, the measure of whether it's okay or not. So what is the impact of you acquiescing or her making all the decisions, or him having the financial control? So I explore there for impact more than looking at the behaviors or the actions themselves. I think anything that looks like power is not going to be healthy in the relationship. But truly mutually agreed on roles that don't seem like balance to us, we can't rely our own beliefs about equality to assess somebody else's ideas of equality or balance. Balance probably is more accurate.
Right. The only thing I would say is that sometimes it's hard to see the impact.
Right.
I think, you know, people.
Well, we don't see it. We need to ask, right? Like, what's the impact on you? And, you know, already just in this little conversation, we've heard resentment, silence, right? Having no voice, not getting my needs met. So looking for impact, positive and negative impacts. But it's good practice for couples to be able to name impact as well. Good to see you.
But
Thanks
so
for staying
great.
on.
Yeah. Bye-bye.